Hi, this is Ed Driscoll for PJmedia.com, and we're talking with R. Emmett Tyrrell, the founder of the American Spectator and the author of the new book, The Death of Liberalism. It's published by Thomas Nelson Books and available from Amazon.com and your local bookseller. And Bob, thanks for stopping by today.
I'm glad to be with you.
Bob, in 2009, Barack Obama took office. Newsweek pronounced, "We are all socialists now," immediately afterwards. And the New York Times book reviewer Sam Tannenhouse famously wrote a book that trumpeted, as he called it, the death of conservatism, only to be proven spectacularly wrong when the Tea Party arose and returned the GOP back to Congress. Given that many polls show Barack Obama eking out a win against Mitt Romney, aren't you jumping the gun a bit pronouncing the death of liberalism?
Well, no, I'm not, because liberalism died in it died in '08, and unlike Tannenhouse's book of '09, The Death of Conservatism, this book, The Death of Liberalism, actually has some facts and statistics and some ideas in it. Sam just kind of bloviated along, sounded like a graduate student. I don't think I've ever been accused of being a graduate student. And these polls that you cite, I think I just looked at Karl Rove's citing of polls this morning in the Wall Street Journal. Even he has this as a very, very close race, and he gives the edge to Romney. But I don't think he's read the proper polls. If you read the proper polls and you consider the battleground states, and you consider the question that's never asked, that being, are you decided or undecided? You come up with a thunderous Obama or defeat, because the undecided vote invariably goes with the challenger, and we have reason to believe that the undecided vote today is going again with the challenger. So you can give me a call in November and tell me I was wrong, but I'll probably be drinking champagne for a week, and the drinks are on me.
Well, fair enough, and I hope you're right. We should probably define our terms, though, if only because liberals never do. At the start of the 20th century, they called themselves progressives, and conservatives at that time were classical laissez-faire liberals. And then progressives started calling themselves liberals, and maybe you can discuss this a bit, around the time of the 1920s, I guess. And then around the time of the 2008 elections, they started calling themselves progressives again.
That's because Americans they were hoping that Americans had forgotten exactly how elitist and repulsive progressives really were. I define liberal and liberalism as a fundamental belief in liberty and in limited government. And I cite a man early in the book in the British Parliament who properly described liberalism. But a certain group of Americans, and they were the progressives, about 1870, rebelled at the notion of limited government, rebelled at the Constitution, thought the Constitution was old-fashioned and out of date, and asserted really the preeminence of the best minds being the elitists. And from there on, the liberals the liberals with a capital L have been a very specialized kind of liberal. In fact, they've been statists, and that's not liberal at all.
Bob, the new book discusses liberalism's civil wars. In the 20th century, how many of these did they have?
Well, they only had two, actually. In '48, they had the Civil War that the radicals under Henry Wallace tried to take over the liberal movement in America, and they got the boot from people like Walter Reuther and Arthur Schlesinger and a whole array of writers and people and Harry Truman ultimately. And then they tried again in '72, and George McGovern, who had been for Henry Wallace in '48, he swept the convention, and he did it, by the way, in sort of a sneaky way. You read the book, you'll find that he was sort of the stealth candidate, even in '72. He didn't declare himself a candidate until rather late in the game, by which time he had he and Gary Hart and people like that had pretty much sewed up the convention. And what's important there is not solely that Henry Wallace's acolyte, George McGovern, swept the convention, but that he brought in a whole generation of kind of slick operators. They were the student government types. They were the coat and tie radicals. They were the 1960s generation of leftists. I call them infantile, the infantile left. And there are people like Al Gore. There are people like Jean-Francois Kerry and the Clintons. And they really introduced into politics a kind of narcissism that ended in '08 with Hillary Clinton's defeat by the Stealth Socialist, that being Obama. And Obama sealed liberalism's fate. Liberalism is no longer liberal. Liberalism has no vitality to it. Liberalism is a bunch of zombies that are about to die, and that'll be the end of them. But the Stealth Socialist has introduced more spending. He has personally spent more money than any other president, more money we don't have. He's contributed to the deficit. He's contributed $5 of the $16 trillion in deficit that we have built up today, and he's going to go on. He sees nothing wrong with $1 trillion deficits. He, as I say, is the Stealth Socialist, and he's going to be defeated in the fall.
Are we witnessing another one of those civil wars now, as slightly more moderate liberals such as Cory Booker and Ed Rendell push back against Obama's attacks on Bain Capital and, heck, capitalism itself?
I haven't decided yet. It's not a civil war within the liberal camp because there are no liberals anymore. I mean, Pat Moynihan was a liberal. Senator Lieberman is kind of a liberal, but he's about to retire. Ed Koch is a liberal, but he's long ago was in retirement. Hubert Humphrey was a great liberal. In fact, he was one of the good liberals back in '48. But, of course, even just to show you how the country's changed, in '48, he was a good, staunch liberal, but everybody agreed he was too liberal, even for the Democratic Party. He was going to stay in Minnesota for many, many years, and he did for quite a while. Then he came out on the national scene. By that time, liberalism had kind of suffused the Democratic Party, and so his liberalism was palatable. But by '72, he was outstripped by George McGovern, and a whole raft of, read the book, there's a whole raft of senators and congressmen in '72 that lined up behind McGovern, and they hated Hubert Humphrey, and they dominated the party until 2008, and they brought it to ruin. They one of the high points of such infantile liberals was when Bill Clinton, who would say anything to get a vote, said the era of big government is over. Well, it was kind of over until the Stealth Socialists took over.
You've mentioned the infantile liberals, the Stealth Socialists, the coat and tie radicals. One of your favorite phrases, which I've referenced in a bunch of my own blog posts over the years, is the culture smog. What is the culture smog, and how big a role does the media play in keeping liberalism propped up?
I think it plays an enormous role. It prefigures the political culture of the country, and I call it a culture smog because people like us have no influence on the culture smog, at least until very recently. And the culture smog is a thoroughly left-wing point of view that dominates at ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, and and that's foreign territory for most Americans. And they can create a scandal where there is no scandal, or better yet, they cover up scandal where there is a real scandal. But now, that culture smog, some call it the bias of the media, that culture smog is being somewhat fumigated. It's being fumigated by Fox News, by talk radio, and by the internet. And I might add that on Fox News, you'll find more diversity of opinion than you'll ever find on CBS or NBC. I mean, Sean Hannity is one of the rare people on television that really works to put on the left-wing point of view and the right-wing point of view. He doesn't share the left-wing point of view, but he gives it a chance to speak for itself. And that's the way it ought to be. But he's the only one of the very few people in television land that dares to let this thing called free speech out of the bag.
Back in 2010, when Angelo Codevilla wrote America's Ruling Class in The American Spectator, I remember writing a blog post that asked, if America's ruling class was beginning to severely fracture, what comes next? Similarly, if liberalism is dying, what replaces it? What comes next?
Well, I think what replaces it is conservatism. I mean, I think we're going to be the dominant orthodoxy for years to come. And on the left, what replaces liberalism is the stealth socialist and socialism. And I dare say there will come a day when people like Obama step right out and admit to being socialists. I mean, I doubt that if you ever get a look at who educated him, I doubt he was ever educated by anything but a hard left professor and a professorate's point of view.
Could Europe's current fiscal meltdown and the civil wars that Europe's liberals are having, and I mean civil wars spelled in all lowercase, be a preview of America's future in the next few years?
Well, I don't think they're our future. I'm really optimistic that we're going to send Barack Obama back to Blue Island, Illinois. I think his days are numbered.
And that sort of bookends with my last question. David Brooks, the Weekly Standard author who wrote Bobos in Paradise in the late 1990s, would later have the seemingly paradoxical convergence of events of first becoming the in-house quote-unquote conservative or at least moderate at the New York Times, and shortly thereafter drink deep the Obama Kool-Aid. Near the end of The Death of Liberalism, you had an interesting take on his now legendary impression of Barack Obama's sartorial sense.
Oh, well, that's where he's sitting in Senator Obama's office. And he had the gall to say this. He's really naive. He says he's kind of a narcissist, full of self-love and arrogance. David says, and I looked at Barack Obama's quote-unquote perfectly creased pants, I guess, but perfect crease in his pants. And I said, this man can be president, and he'll be a very good president. Well, he is president, David, and you can decide for yourself how good he is, but I'm sure glad he wasn't wearing pantyhose that day, or God knows what conclusion you would have drawn.
And I don't think I'm giving anything away for our readers when you describe Obama's sharply creased suit as the Undertaker's garb to bury liberalism as it was defined over the last 20 years. This is Ed Driscoll for PJmedia.com, and we've been talking with R. Emmett Tyrrell, the author of The Death of Liberalism, published by Thomas Nelson Books and available from Amazon.com and your local bookseller. And Bob, thank you once again for stopping by today.
It's my pleasure. Bye-bye.